This is the moment President Marcus Holland lost control of the Middle East. This is the visual that is terrifying Washington this morning. This is the notification that the White House has been dreading more than any intelligence briefing in 20 years. If you look at the Strait of Hormuz right now, you will see something that has never happened in modern history. Empty water, silent shipping lanes, 20 miles of ocean that normally carries 20 million barrels of oil every single day, now carrying nothing. Zero tankers, zero cargo ships, zero movement. The world's most critical energy choke point has gone dark, and the president, who promised he would never let this happen, is watching his entire strategy collapse in real time. As of 6:47 this morning, Wednesday, March 11th, 2026, Iran has successfully closed the Strait of Hormuz. President Holland, already battling a recession at home, already facing investigations into his energy deals, and already losing support from his own party, has just been blindsided by the one crisis he swore would never happen on his watch. In this deep dive, we are going to reveal exactly what happened in the Oval Office when Holland got the call, expose the private conversations where his closest allies started abandoning him, show you the market data that proves this is worse than anyone is admitting, and explain why the president, who campaigned on being the toughest leader on Iran, has become the most isolated and powerless figure in Washington. Marcus Holland isn't just facing a foreign policy crisis. He is experiencing a complete and total political collapse that will define his presidency and possibly end it. 6 months ago, President Marcus Holland stood in the Rose Garden and made a promise to the American people. The plan was to force Iran into total submission through what he called Operation Maximum Pressure. It was supposed to be the toughest sanctions regime in history, combined with military strikes if necessary, that would bring Iran to its knees within weeks. He promised cheap gas prices, American energy dominance, and a Middle East that would finally respect American power again. He promised voters they would never see oil above $80 a barrel. He promised his donors that their energy investments would pay off. He promised his national security team that Iran would back down because they always do. But the cost wasn't just diplomatic isolation from European allies who warned him this was reckless. It was his entire credibility. This meant destroying the careful balance that had kept the Strait of Hormuz open for decades. This meant gambling that Iran would never actually use its most powerful weapon. Democratic Senator Rachel Chen, chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, warned him in a classified briefing that is now leaking everywhere. She argued that pushing Iran into a corner with no diplomatic exit would force them to do exactly what they have always threatened to do: close the strait. But Holland interrupted her, according to sources in that meeting, and said that Iran was weak, that they were bluffing, and that America needed to stop being afraid of third-world countries. He dismissed her concerns as political opposition, trying to make him look weak. Marcus Holland gambled that Iran would choose economic survival over retaliation. He assumed that no country would commit economic suicide just to hurt America. He assumed that threatening overwhelming military force would be enough. He assumed wrong. At 4:23 in the morning, Eastern Time, President Holland's phone rang in the White House residence. For 6 minutes, there was silence on his end as the National Security Advisor walked him through what had just happened in the Persian Gulf. Then, the shouting started. White House staff in the West Wing could hear the president yelling from across the building, demanding to know how this was possible, how intelligence missed it, how the Navy let this happen. His chief of staff, Thomas Rivera, arrived at the residence within 12 minutes, visibly shaking, according to a Secret Service agent who saw him enter. The president was pacing in the treaty room, still in his pajamas, watching 3 different news channels showing the same thing. Oil prices spiking, markets in free fall, breaking news alerts saying Iran had closed the Strait of Hormuz. But this was just the beginning. While the president was having his meltdown in the White House, the oil markets in Asia were already opening to absolute chaos. Brent crude jumped from $83 a barrel to $17 in the first hour of trading. At that exact same moment, the Saudi government was calling the Secretary of State, demanding to know why they were not warned this would happen, why American intelligence failed, and whether the United States could actually protect the shipping lanes like it had promised for 50 years. And most shockingly, the Secretary of Energy was already on the phone with major oil company executives. And one of those executives, according to leaked audio that is now circulating on Capitol Hill, asked the secretary directly if the administration had any plan at all, or if they were just making this up as they went along. Pause. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged 432 points in the first 30 minutes of trading when New York opened. On the screens at the New York Stock Exchange, traders watched in horror as energy stocks skyrocketed while everything else collapsed. Transportation companies, airlines, shipping firms, logistics operations, all of them getting destroyed because nobody can move goods if oil is at $120. The market doesn't care about tough talk or military threats. It cares about whether ships can move and whether energy flows. And right now, neither is happening. According to leaks from inside the Pentagon, we have learned from senior military officials that an emergency National Security Council meeting took place at 7:15 that morning. The participants were the President, the Vice President, the Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the National Security Advisor, and the Director of National Intelligence. The topic was blunt and terrifying. What do we do now that Iran has actually done what we said they would never do? One defense official speaking to reporters on Background described the meeting as the most tense and chaotic they had ever witnessed in 20 years of government service. The president, according to multiple sources, opened by demanding military options immediately: strike Iran's Revolutionary Guard bases, destroy their naval facilities, send a message that America does not accept this. It was a cold, calculated moment when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs had to explain reality to the president. They looked at military strikes, which would take days to coordinate and might make the situation worse because Iran could retaliate by actually mining the strait, which they have not done yet. They looked at escorting tankers through with Navy destroyers, which the military cannot do safely because they do not have mine-clearing capabilities in position, and Iran has anti-ship missiles covering the entire waterway. They realized that President Holland had gotten America into a crisis that had no good military solution, only bad options and worse options. The decision was made, according to the leaked account, to publicly state that America was monitoring the situation while privately scrambling to figure out what the hell to do next. Why did Iran do this? Follow the survival instinct. Iran is a country that has been under crushing American sanctions for months, watching their economy collapse, watching their currency lose half its value, and watching President Holland go on television every week promising more pressure. But they wanted respect and negotiation, not total humiliation and regime collapse. Sources say the supreme leader of Iran and his top military commanders had an emergency meeting 3 days before this happened. The message from Iranian intelligence was clear. America is not going to stop until we are destroyed, or until we make them stop. The strait is our only leverage. If we do not use it, we lose everything anyway. This shifts power from Washington to throne. President Holland can no longer dictate terms, cannot force Iran to surrender, and cannot even protect global oil shipments. He is just a leader who made massive threats that he cannot back up, and triggered a crisis he cannot solve. By alienating European allies who might have helped with diplomacy, by refusing to negotiate, by promising military dominance that the Pentagon cannot actually deliver in this scenario, he is committing political suicide while thinking he is projecting strength. When your own party senators start giving interviews saying the administration mishandled this, that signals panic. Senator Chen, the Democrat who warned him, went on national television this morning and said, without mentioning the president by name, that this crisis was entirely predictable and entirely preventable. When Republican Senator David Walsh, who usually defends the administration, told reporters that he has serious questions about how we got here, that signals that even Holland's allies are calculating their exits. What historians will call the Hormuz debacle is really about a president who confused toughness with strategy. This is a leader who believed his own campaign rhetoric meeting the reality that other countries have power too. This isn't a foreign policy challenge. This is a catastrophic failure of judgment that has put the global economy at risk and destroyed America's credibility as a reliable partner. The legal ramifications are building in ways Holland is not prepared for. The House Energy and Commerce Committee has announced emergency hearings into whether the administration had intelligence warnings that were ignored. The claims include failure to brief Congress on military plans, failure to coordinate with allies, and potentially misleading statements about Iran's capabilities. This isn't the usual Democratic opposition. This is bipartisan concern that the president gambled with global energy security and lost. If those hearings revealed that intelligence agencies warned this could happen and were overruled for political reasons, that could trigger investigations into whether the president violated his oath to protect and defend. Here is the domino effect. If oil stays above $100 for more than a week, then inflation, which was already at 4%, jumps to 6 or 7%. If inflation hits 6%, then the Federal Reserve has to raise interest rates again. If interest rates go up, then the housing market collapses, the stock market crashes further, and the recession that was just a possibility becomes a certainty. If a recession happens before the midterm elections, then the president's party loses control of Congress. We are looking at an economic spiral that could take years to recover from, and it all traces back to one decision to provoke Iran without having a plan for what happens if they fight back. China is watching this. They see that America cannot protect the world's most important shipping route. Russia is calculating how this weakens American influence in the Middle East and whether they can step in as the broker. Saudi Arabia is quietly reaching out to Thrawn through back channels, according to intelligence intercepts, because they need the oil to flow more than they need to support American policy. A desperate president who has lost control of the situation can be ignored by allies and exploited by adversaries. Where is the Secretary of State? Silence. Secretary Michael Park has not held a press conference, not done any interviews, not made any public statements since this crisis began. Why? Because he opposed Operation Maximum Pressure from the beginning, according to sources close to him, and now he is positioning himself to survive the political fallout. He is distancing, protecting his reputation, possibly planning his resignation. When your top diplomat goes silent during a diplomatic crisis, that tells you everything about how bad this really is. This creates a split in the Republican coalition that cannot be healed. On one side, the traditional national security establishment that believes in alliances, diplomacy, and not making threats you cannot back up. On the other side, the president's core supporters who still believe this is tough leadership and that America should never negotiate with Iran under any circumstances. A divided party cannot defend a failing policy, and it cannot win elections when voters are paying double for gas and groceries. Reports from White House sources describe a president who is sleeping 4 hours a night, obsessively checking oil prices on his phone, and calling his national security team at all hours, demanding updates that never have good news. He keeps asking the same question over and over, according to people who have heard these calls. When will the strait reopen? When can we tell the public this is over? Nobody can give him an answer. He is experiencing what psychologists would call acute stress reaction, combined with the realization that events are beyond his control. Staff are limiting his media exposure, screening his calls, and trying to prevent him from making statements that would make the crisis worse. The oil price chart isn't just numbers on a screen. It is a visual representation of the president's complete failure to understand how power works. It represents the gap between campaign promises and governing reality. Marcus Holland wanted to be the president who made America feared again. He ended up with oil at $120, a closed Strait of Hormuz, and a global economy on the edge of recession, because he confused intimidation with strategy. You can manipulate poll numbers and spin media coverage, but you cannot manipulate oil markets and global shipping. You can spin domestic politics, but you cannot spin the fact that 20% of the world's oil cannot move through a waterway that you promised to keep open. The ultimate truth is that reality always wins. Economics, military capabilities, and the actual balance of power cannot be denied. no matter how many press conferences you hold or how tough you sound on television. So, where are we? President Marcus Holland is isolated in the White House, surrounded by advisors who are already planning their exit strategies. The military has told him there are no good options. The State Department is basically paralyzed because the president ignored diplomatic warnings. His own party is starting to break with him publicly. The markets have lost confidence in his ability to manage this crisis. He is the President of the United States, and yet he is powerless to fix the disaster he created. As we head into the next 72 hours, expect increasingly desperate behavior from this White House. President Holland will try to shift blame to intelligence agencies for not predicting this, even though they did. He might try to announce military operations that sound decisive but accomplish nothing. He could even consider extreme options, like releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which would be a band-aid on a bullet wound and an admission that he has no real solution. But what cannot be undone is the credibility he destroyed. The trust that allies placed in American leadership is shattered. The assumption that America could protect global commerce is now questioned. When oil markets panic and tankers refuse to move, there is no return to the way things were. The international alliance that supported American policy in the Middle East is broken. European countries that Holland insulted and ignored are now working on their own solutions with Iran. Saudi Arabia cannot wait for Washington to figure out its strategy. When your closest allies start making deals without you, when they stop taking your calls, when they publicly criticize your judgment, the damage is permanent. Subscribe. We will be monitoring the emergency G7 meeting happening in 48 hours, where European leaders are expected to pressure Holland to negotiate. If Iran announces they will reopen the strait in exchange for lifting sanctions, we will break down whether Holland has any choice but to accept. This is the end game for a presidency that bet everything on a strategy that collapsed. Watch closely. The Strait of Hormuz did not close because of Iran's strength. It closed because of President Marcus Holland's catastrophic miscalculation. The numbers do not lie. Oil went from $83 to $120 in 6 days. 0 tankers are moving through the world's most important waterway. The global economy is staring at recession, and the president who promised this would never happen is now begging his team for options that do not exist. This is not political spin. These are the documented facts of the worst foreign policy disaster in a generation. Whether this gets resolved through humiliating negotiations or drags on for months, one thing is certain. Marcus Holland will never recover from this. His presidency is defined by this failure. His legacy is the president who closed the Strait of Hormuz by not understanding when to stop pushing. Reality caught up, and there is nowhere left to hide. Stay safe. God help us all. The empire just learned it has limits.